often difficult process of trying to juxtapose, overlay, combine, collage, or anyway, bring closer together urban fabrics, compositions, pieces of cities and territories, which had a particular meaning in respect to the theme proposed. So this is what you've been doing in the past weeks, trying to work on the selection of the components, trying to work on the difficult, what I would say, assembling or welding of or stitching of these fragments, sometimes with easy solutions, sometimes with nearly impossible solutions. And the result has been a collection of cities, each with its own, I would say, founding anecdote, founding narrative, which have been assembled in a sort of second degree of arbitrariness into a sort of plural metropolis based on the assemblies themselves based on fragments. So it's a second degree collage of what of the collage you had been doing in the first place.
I will be sharing my screen. Can you see it? Yes?
Yes, we can't anymore now.
And hear me? Yes. Okay.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, great. So yeah, we will be presenting the 11 imaginary cities, which are divided into 3 chapters: cities and water, cities and growth, and cities and oblivion. And then as a final result, we will also be presenting the collective contribution called cities and mirrors. So we will be starting by the first chapter, cities and water. The first city is called Buenos Aires, the first imaginary city. A city which recovers the relationship of Buenos Aires with its own river of La Plata. But first, I would like to read aloud the text. So, as Le Corbusier said, the best way to arrive in Buenos Aires is by the water, in the black of night. The flat sea without limit to right and left, above the sky full of stars, and the city like a line of light in the horizon. Entering the Pampas, you may feel the mud on your feet and the slowness of the Argentine countryside. Leaving behind the silhouettes of the gauchos and the smell of the earth, the visitor crosses the thin stream that embraces the city. Surrounded by light sailboats managed by tattooed and slender sailors, you arrive by water to the perimeter foliage, conquered by an extravagant fauna which coexists naturally with the inhabitants of the metropolis. When you encounter the city center, you may wander its disorientating grid of roads until you reach the most desired destination, the transparent and crystalline Rio de la Plata. In it, offices and towers float lightly on the spot where the Casa Rosada and the fort once stood. At the feet of the towers, children contemplate tropical corals across the water, and executives bask in the sun as they proudly gaze at the horizon of their new purified sea. The citizens of Buenos Aires had forgotten the water, but have now renewed their relationship with it, bringing it back into their lives and inspiring people all around the world to want to have the same experience. Unfortunately, until further notice, there are no flights available to travel to the island of Tango, where tourists fall hypnotized by the immensity of the reclaimed river. So the collage is composed by 2 images that form the background of the image, which are the Argentina countryside, La Pampa, and the foundation plan by Juan de Garay, the foundation plan for Buenos Aires. But the most important fragments are the 3 images that you see below that were projects that tried to recover the Rio de la Plata through the history of architecture. Projects that failed, that they never were built, but now in this new city are recovered again. So we have Costanera Avenue by Forestier, which connects the city center with the Argentinian countryside, the business center district by Le Corbusier, and the airport for Buenos Aires, designed by Amancio Williams. Being this the final image or final collage for Buenos Aires. We will move now to the next imaginary city.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nova Insoltera. So if we can move to the next slide. So I will read my piece whilst we look at the image. So in Nova Insoltera, you can find everything at the harbour's edge. This would be true in most cities, but here in Nova Insoltera, it is certain. Walking along the quayside, you may meet a group of sailors boisterous with the energy of boys with little to do. You may find a group of bankers stood around a bar's high table, the sharp lines of their suits somewhat crumpled.
Could everyone close the mic except Matthew? Because I think there are some. Anna, your mic is open.
And the screen sharing stopped. So where were we? Walking along the quayside, you may meet a group of sailors boisterous with the energy of boys with little to do. You may find a group of bankers stood around a bar's high wall, the sharp lines of their suits somewhat crumpled as the late afternoon sun and tall glasses of beer dull their cutthroat sensibilities. And everyone else would ignore the young man boredly shifting his weight from one foot to another, conspicuous in his camouflage, rifle in hand, pointed to the. You could come across a group of children jumping, screaming into the water, their parents sitting nearby, cooling their ankles after work. The feeling of water flowing between their toes, the image of them rippling through the surface. On the horizon, ships are silhouetted against a rusted orange sky. A handful of masts are visible, although dwarfed by the bulk of tankers containing ships, occasional cruise ships. The con towers of frigates and destroyers spike upwards, shielded by razor wire and concrete walls. To pay too much attention would be to only invite that attention back on yourself. Once night falls, the light of the city can be seen by ships well over the horizon. Back at the pier, the opera house is lit, its edifice the closest you can find to cliffs. A trickle of the gilded can be seen leaving the opera. The hiss of static can be heard from radio earpieces, emanating from the quiet men who watch the guests depart. In the docks, the cranes lift containers wordlessly, rest not a part of their product specification. So if we could go to the parts. So here I've used the constructed landscapes of urban docklands to try and create this island nation, and this island nation is being used as a territorial claim on a wider part of sea. So we often see these claims being made to control the resources underneath the sea, and then the populations of these places are used to legitimize this. But of course, in these areas, there are also there's also a tension as it's somewhat military occupation, and of course, every country has a security state, and the reaction of most people is to try and ignore the state, especially when it sort of shows its face in the city, because the last thing anyone really wants is to attract the attention of that security state upon themselves. So life happens. And then maybe if we can just look at the final image. That's everything. Thank you.
Hi, so my city is Samudra Peninsula, and I can maybe go to the next slide. And next, I can read my text. An old man fishing, kids jumping to the water, or a lady washing her clothes in the river is not a rare sight when you enter Samudra. Here you could explore every part of the city by the water. First, you will enter through the Grand Canal with a series of buildings which have their door open to the water. People in this area use boats as a daily transportation system. The journey to entering the peninsula is somehow like seeing Canaletos drawing come to life. Following the water, the building and ground level start to rise. The city controls the water level, so it does not flood the city. Instead of boats, the residents use bicycle for their daily life, their daily commute. Moving to the heart of the city, you will find two channels of the river. The small and narrow one brings you to the high-dense residential area, where the dwellers depend their life on the water. Here you could find the residents use water for bathing, cooking, and dump their trash. The other channel will take you to the larger river, where you could visit several heritage temples and palaces. The cultural part of the island faces the river here. In the east part, you could find city trade ports, where ships from all over the world come into the city. Dozens of automatic cranes handling tons of cargo containers. While just across the harbor, the Samuderan is riding steeplechase, playing the barrel of love, and drinking milk from the inexhaustible cow in the beach area in their free time. In Samudera, what is unthinkable is happening by the water. And next. So I take cities that have unique relationship with the water in my collage. So which many types of activity can be seen through the city. First, I take Venice as and Grand Canal as my entry point, then go to pass through the Amsterdam. I'm sorry. And then the water will split into the residential area of Jakarta and the Chao Phraya River of Bangkok. And then I also use Rotterdam to show the relationship between machine and water. And the other part is Coney Island and its playground to see the leisure activity of the beach. Next, so this is the final collage of the Samudra Peninsula. Thank you. You can move on.
Hello. So my name is Georgia, and my city is part of Citizen and Growth. Its name is Transcity, and it is a city that connects, next slide, please, that connects and expands. And now I would like to tell you the story of it. To tell you about Transcity, I should begin by describing the center. You might imagine its dense skyline rising over the water. However, the Transcity is different. You find yourself in an endless journey between the permanent and the transient. You wander for hours and you never know which part of the city you explore. Where is the city center? Is it here, there, all around you? You go ahead, you turn, you stop to figure out, but there is no clear answer. You just continue. Now, the starting point is just a memory. Did you start from the city of Alger, the island of Toulouse, or was it New York? You drive in the uninhibited highways and streets wandering. The uncertainty overwhelms you, and you decide to walk towards the closest neighborhood. The warming light and the exhilarated sense of the air is still present, and as you walk, the rustling of the leaves becomes alleviating. From an opening between the trees, you steal a glance in the large common space of a two-story house. Behind it lies the improvised and colorful playground and the farmland. The noises of the cows, sheep, and horses is unexpected. However, the unexpected feels familiar in this journey. What a relief. Like water that only knows how to flow, the Transcity only knows how to go beyond. The constraints have no place, and if you try to seize its identity, it slips through your fingers. It fills the no man's land with millions of people and refuses all the territorial authorities and zoning ordinances. It creates the networks and the relationship between existing urban fabrics. It connects but never divides. Next slide. So the Transcity expands in a bay that resembles New York Lower Bay, actually starts from New York but ends up in Alger. Toulouse appears as an island in the bay. So the important part is the proposals chosen, which are commonplace, the thought of expansion. Kenzo Tangen's plan for Tokyo that was proposed in 1960 connects New York and Algiers, and now is meant to host the expansion not anymore of Tokyo Bay, but of the new bay. Inside Tangen's plan for Tokyo, the Leonidov's Magnitogorsk that was proposed in 1930 takes over the linear megastructure and expands for 20 kilometers, integrating the idea of the convergence of urbanization and landscape. Cantil's Josik and Wood's Lemirai links different parts of Tangen's plan for Tokyo with other fragments of the cities that exist in the bay. For example, as originally it takes the expansion of Toulouse and connects it to the linear megastructure, but also finds connection to parts of New York like Staten Island or Brooklyn and parts of Algiers. So this is the final collage. And we can move on to Mobilopolis.
Thank you, Georgia. My name is Michael, and this is Mobilopolis. Next slide, please. And once again, the view of Mobilopolis. Next slide. Nighttime. There's no artificial light bouncing back from the overcast above the saline marshes of Holland. A small weather balloon floats by. On the horizon, dim pink lights can be seen from a handful of small-scale glass houses owned by collectives that were lucky enough to be protected from the tides and smart enough to transition to seawater crops. In the North Sea, an elongated island remains, once formed by a stretch of dunes. Energy is scarce, but here, high-tech and high-voltage experiments are still ongoing. The cool air carries a smell of rubber, humid asphalt, and ozone emissions. High-pitched chirps from appliances switching on and off, electromotors producing buzzes and hums, noise that might sound familiar, perhaps even friendly. However, the pulsing infrasounds from sweeping rotor blades would disorient you, eventually driving you mad. Humans do not belong here. Mobilopolis functions as a self-sufficient and self-learning development facility for automatized transport. A 64-kilometer stretch of high-performance asphalt is perfectly straight, even ignoring Earth's curvature. Every kilometer of the highway axis is indicated by slender white masts reading Vestas SG, which carry the mammoth wind turbines that power the island. The axis allows self-driving vehicles to achieve top speeds, their steering mechanisms only necessary to exit to the sectors for charging stations, garages, paint shops, and eventually disassembly centers, where all machines are recycled to resources for a newer and leaner generation. In these centers, data is retrieved from black boxes to be logged and transmitted back to the mainland that once was. Next slide. So Mobilopolis is based on cities where technology, economy, industry, and ultimately also mobility inform the development of a region. These are the parts that were selected for this collage, and they were combined with current developments that we see. And all of them are aligned and organized through a linear axis. And with this collage, I wonder how long these systems can be used to continue this linear development and perhaps remain long after humans have left.
So I'll be introducing Parlor Park. It's the imaginary city for the Proud Boys. Next slide. So it's a city by a lake, and I'll read the text. So Parlor Park is the fastest growing city in America, where speech is free and 4G is key. Here you can live with like-minded people who are truly proud of their country. Built upon the solid foundation of a white city, Parlor Park offers something for everyone. From anywhere in town, you can take an ATV to the nearest Walmart in 15 minutes to resupply. If you prefer taking your pickup truck, you can get there even faster, as off-roading is allowed everywhere within the city limits. For housing, you have so many options, more than anywhere else. Our most popular is the gated community of quaint little mansions with a cabin by the lake. Here you can be away from the anarchy in the city, but still be close to Parlor Park's biggest Walmarts. Then whenever you're in need of more privacy, your cabin, which is still close to one of our mini Walmarts, is right across the lake. If comfort is your MO, check out the Parlor Tower. Each room has a bathroom made entirely of gold. You'll also be able to keep sights on the entirety of the city from the safety of your home. Everyone will want to be your friend if you live here, and when they don't, they'll be removed at the front door by our security team. Does this sound a little out of your budget? That's okay. In the meantime, you can rent one of our mobile housing units. These units give you the option to move to any other part of town when you need. It's freedom in a home. Just make sure to find a designated park area. We hope you come visit us in this wonderful town where the proud can be proud. Bring your tactical gear, flags, and costumes so we can all march together, free of judgment, government regulations, and reptilians. You can go to the fragments. So here, there's the Walmart, the gated community, the lake cabin, and the trailer park, all coming from suburban and rural areas in Minnesota. And then the Trump Tower from Manhattan is incorporated in the collage at the southern part of the lake. And you can take a look at the entire collage. Thank you. Now we can move on.
Hello, my name is Maria, and I will tell you about Balshoi city. Next page. I will tell the story of Balshoi city through the text. Balshoi city is the most glorious capital city where all kinds of grand buildings can be found. Heading east along a winding river through long strips of fields, you eventually reach the city. Sailing to the very center of Balshoi city, you come across to the tip of a huge palace with majestic sculptures. Not given time to look around all of the palace splendor, the main port opens in front of you with a huge square strewn with merchants and trade counters. Stepping into the main square of Balshoi city, you see the buildings of complex form that you can find only in your dreams. And after them, the old fortress opens in your view. The gorgeous fortress with the diversity of towers and domes is very reminiscent of the familiar buildings of a medieval city. But you will never explore all its details because your eye is captured by skyscrapers, one above the other, scattered in a very center. In Balshoi city, you feel like a tsar, and you will get whatever you want or even imagine. The water canals take you through blocks, avenues, palaces, mansions, churches, and Renaissance squares, scale, contrast, and grandeur of which do not allow your curious gaze to stop. Night falls quickly, and the city of largest buildings plunge into nightlife. You find yourself on wide boulevards with the bright view of the endless perspective and straight lines. You unwittingly try to go deeper into the old quarters full of allure, where you finally find solidity in this capital city. Next page. So I chose the background map that is old Moscow, 1906, before fire, trying to imagine how Moscow would like if Peter I had experiment with canals in Moscow, and that Moscow would be a capital for most vivid time of monarchy. So I choose fragments of Venice and Amsterdam as port cities, and Rome fragments, Paris squares and boulevards as the expressing of Renaissance and Classicism with right forms in complex medieval city. And next page, please. I also add St. Petersburg's main features as Nevsky Prospect and Winter Palace by inserting projects of Leonidov and Le Corbusier and Arch Defense, that the big scale objects, so to emphasize the idea of Balshoi city as the most capital city. And on the collage, you can see how all these fragments arrange in the old Moscow map. Thank you.
Hi, we're moving to cities and opinion. And if we could go to the next chapter, I will tell you about Omphalia. So Omphalia is the city of centers. And could we move to the text? Fog, steep trails towards the highest plateau, a river flowing on top of the clouds. You can barely breathe anymore. When you finally reach Omphalia, city of centers, You suddenly find before you every fragment once considered the core of human civilization. The city's true form is a patchwork of history. Unlike any other city, Omphalia spreads through overlapping memories, enclaving the timeless glory of the metropolis. Each fragment forms its own palimpsest. If this is not your first journey, you already know Omphalia is a city of no peripheries. It is a city of instants, condensed or scattered. Even if you follow a semicircular path, you will end up in another center and on a different time. This continues in space and time. Omphalia is constantly growing. Its new Omphalia, compact as a living body, lasts throughout the centuries. To reach its port, one cannot simply draw a route on the map, and it is yet contained in every atlas. There can be no set date for arrival. Nevertheless, the search for it can never stop. Its unique artifacts reflect upon every city one seeks. The Agora has always been the social center of gravity. Its riverbanks shape the trading routes across the world. The king and the jockler are the same person. The hippodrome is facing the royal palace. The trident decides upon your fate. In Omphalia, the traveler lives through the past and present at the same time. Never in all my travels had I ventured so far towards the future. If we could go to the next slide. So the fragments are taken out of cities that were once considered the center of the world. So it is the Agora of Athens, it's the Royal Palace and the Hippodrome of Constantinople. Then it's a part of Campo Marzio, Rome. Then again another part of Nolle's map of Rome, part of Paris, a part of Manhattan, and then it's the riverbank, the Thames riverbanks from London. And for the background, it is the highest plateau of Mount Olympus, the plateau of the Muses. If we could go to the next slide. And here is the final drawing of Omphalia. And we can now move to City of Rumors.
Hello, my name is Hen, and due to some technical problem, I will introduce my city through Jean's screen. Go to the next slide. So my city is the city of rumor, where I try to explore the nature of the rumor and its connection with the city fabric. We go to the next slide. In the city of rumors, coffee house, patios, and corridors locate in every block and around every corner. Rumor mongers gather to drink coffee, learn the gossip of the day, and even just to hear others' residents' conversation and start new ones. Each resident in the city has his or her terms to describe what it looked like, but seldom overlap. The entire city center is a great labyrinth in which rumors create, ferment, and spread out. Sometimes travelers got lost in the city, for every block resembles another, and every corner mimics another. Modern motorways and boulevards cut through the city and provide another opportunity to spread the rumors further out. One who enters and exits the town always ends up in the middle of endless traffic. Congestion bends the perception of space and time, whereas drive-through become ideal places for passengers mingling and consuming more information from their car radios and TV screens. Like traffic problems, the only reaction toward the spread of rumor is to producing and consuming more simultaneously. The typology in the city of rumors is a massive palimpsest that the city continuously marks its activities. Once the river ran along and Regis route are now occupied by gigantic boxes for processing and distributing rumors beyond the city realm. Like rumor itself, the natural landscape's origins are ambiguous and uncertain. Through speculation and speculation only can passengers reimagine them. For the common quality of memories and rumors is that they are put together from fragments. Let's go to the next slide. So I try to juxtapose the 16th century London and Nolle's map of Rome. This is the very organic and very complex city fabrics, and put along with some of the wildest human creation on Beverly Hill, on Westland in the Netherlands, and on the highways in the Americas. Let's go to the last slide. And then I put them together to show the complex and the uncertainty of the city of rumors. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nishi and I'll be presenting the city of Ariadne. Next slide. The city of Ariadne is a juxtaposition of grids creating a labyrinthine city. Next slide, please. Only the bravest find happiness in this labyrinth of the city of Ariadne. The city is a system of intersecting grids, and one can choose among the million possibilities of tortuous zigzag routes to reach a destination. The inhabitants celebrate the possible variations of everyday life in the protection of the city's design, originally planned to torture intruders by being lost and isolated in the juxtaposed mesh. Only when the visitor empathizes with the city's scarring past does it start to reveal the apparent order inherent in the chaos of the grids. I entered the city and was immediately consciously aware of the large grid of the road network, as the crossroads appeared to be the same in the last 20 kilometers I drove by. I found myself to be retracing my steps as I made a turn into the grid of city blocks. The smaller grid of follies in between the city blocks acted as pauses in the continuous grids, as if analogous to signboards, trying to direct its visitors. I followed these follies, lost in its translation, until the city of Ariadne opened up to me. Being incepted into this loop of grids, I parked my car and walked into the smallest grid at the center, which was the Holocaust Memorial, meant to disorient the visitor yet again. These overlapping grids portrayed a different narrative each time I encountered them, until I spoke to the old man outside the memorial, who dawned on me the cohesiveness of the city's planning. A map of this city should show all the different paths in different colors, with the hidden routes where the inhabitants live peacefully, the evident routes opted by the visitors, and all those perplexing routes where men from the 20th century are lost, still trying to find their way out. Next slide, please. The selected fragments are cities with different grids in terms of scales and function, with the largest grid in the New York, and the smallest in the Holocaust Memorial. The grids of New York, La Plata, Chandigarh, and Lavillette and the Holocaust Memorial are superimposed to create a new system, that of a labyrinth. Next slide, please. Here we can see the city of Ariadne. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline, and this is Final Destination. Slide. Final Destination is a city of cemeteries. Next slide. Final Destination is the democratic city of the dead, where one chooses for themselves where to go. It is the last place where everyone will end up. Its vacancy rests on the disintegration of a body, leaving many waiting long durations to be able to relocate to the city. One arrives in the city by train, transporting the bodies of the dead along with the living bodies that are either visiting or waiting to receive their key to be able to permanently stay. Crossing the threshold of the train, the body is engulfed in the openness of expansive grass hills. This is where one stays to contemplate their choice of eternal habitation within the city. One can choose the path of the underground with its disorienting tunnels, where the dead are stacked on top of each other, creating the texture of the city. One skeleton is unidentifiable in the underground, and it is a place to go for the dead that are ashamed of one's past. The second choice is to head towards the coast, crossing the water and the final destination to the island. This is where one awaits the sadness to be washed away from the water over time and be eternally forgotten. The third choice is to head towards the forest, where those who are regretful can reflect alone in a calmness setting covered by the vastness of the trees, isolated from the rest of the city. The final path is the path up to the mountain, towards the final destination of the Lantern Temple. This is the final achievement one can make repeatedly over and over again for those who are fearful of the oblivion. Next slide. So the fragments are segments of different cemeteries throughout the world. So the Stockholm Cemetery by Asplund in the forest, Veneris coast of in India, where the ships sail off with the dead bodies, the catacombs underground in Paris, San Michele in Venice, the island of the dead, and the Japanese cemetery in the temples, of the forest and mountain, and finally the London Necropolis Railroad. Next slide. And this is the final image. And I believe we are moving on to the collective, cities and mirrors.
Yes, so I will read you about Cities and Mirrors, which is a collective collage of our cities. If we could go. And here you can see it. It is composed of two opposing capital cities and their peripheries. If we could go to the text. Settling on the river Dividere, two cities grew. Although they started out closer than any could be, the river created a rift between them. One wanted to be as close to the water as possible, bringing the water into the city, and the other as far from it, keeping the water out. One sought to bring everything to the center, and the other grew in chaotic patches. One tried to look to the past, while the other wandered searching. These twin cities of Taurus and Oblivio have now grown to become one, connected by a new bridge that spans across the river, an area previously only occupied by the most neutral of things, money and death. This new bridge strives to reunite these two cities that once were one, but were divided by a silly quarrel. Now, visitors can wake up to a beautiful waterfront view of the commercial center of the world near Taurus. Then, after having their morning coffee, follow the canals exploring the man-made peninsula. When ready to set out for the day, a quick drive on the highway will bring them by the scenery of the Pampas and the neighborhood by the water that had glowed in the distance the night before. Entering Taurus, they pass under the old bridge that spanned the river, still perfectly straight and fully automated. In the city, there are so many historical sites to see, and even a whole week isn't enough to explore everything. So savvy travelers cross to Oblivio, encountering strange sights like farm animals in playgrounds along the way. Stepping out in Oblivio, the first thing everyone notices is that the air is so much thinner here, and the island in the river looks so small now. One wonders if this was why only machines crossed the river for so long. Getting out of the city here means taking the highway, and everyone that visits does so to visit the famous cemetery outside town. Going through the city, the drivers always say that only tourists go to the cemetery, and that the only people living here that go aren't up to any good. Many people get tired of the crash drivers and try to find their own way, but most get lost on the way as the area seems to be planned to keep people out. However, trudging through all this chaos is rewarded as they enter the dense forest bringing serenity. Here is where all people from both cities come to rest. The island here was where the settlers had first arrived, and finally the two cities can be experienced as one, as they had just hoped.
I can briefly explain the composition. So here we have two city centers. On the right, we have the Bolshoi city, and the cities surrounding it are the cities which have a close relationship with water. And on the left, we have Omphalia as the city center, and the cities around it are meant to dislocate the visitors. Connecting these two are the growing cities of Transcity and Mobilopolis, trying to make a network of the entire collection. We can go to the next slide. This is the final collage of our imaginary cities. This is the end of our presentation, so we would like to open the floor for a discussion with our guests.
Thank you very much. So I don't know who wants to step in. Maybe I'll say a couple of things right now. I mean, I'm struck by seeing all this dense block of presentations, how pessimistic is the view of universe you're giving. I mean, it's altogether a collection of dystopias. It's about repression, about control, about getting lost, sometimes a little bit of playfulness, but in most cases we're facing very often written in an ironic mode, in a very well written ironic mode. I'm thinking of some of the essays. It gives us a rather gloomy view of what cities are up to.
Matthew, how would you like to respond to that?
I was just thinking that may be a sign of the times that we're living in at the moment, that our experience of the cities is somewhat strained. Maybe it's our own critiques of the cities in a more general sense, but yes, I feel that the situation that we're all stuck in at the moment may be responsible for this mood.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
I just wanted to ask you, it seems that every one of these cities, the fragment seems to reinforce one singular condition. And I wonder why if this was a premise, you didn't think of a city where multiple conditions are possible.
I think that's a very interesting question, and maybe subconsciously all of us were trying to form a narrative out of the fragments, and that is why we were trying to direct it towards one story in the end. And yeah, the contradictions start coming up when we have this whole collective collage, when we start seeing these different narratives and how we can bring that together.
Yeah, because the collective city in the end, it's even though, of course, as Jean-Louis said, it's they all reinforce a certain negative mode and a sort of irony, which seems to be the genre that most of you chose to operate. But individually, these examples, they seem, to show cities that have a purpose or have a kind of a certain kind of inhabitant, or this is part of a certain stage in someone's life. So it's all very homogeneous, and that's not really how cities operate. So I just, I wanted to ask you, because that's something that's, in fact, all cities have this condition. And of course, you had to choose a title and a theme, but these fragments could be interconnected in a different way.
Of course, this doesn't reflect, these are condensed version of cities, and social, racial, cultural diversity is not always reflected. Sometimes it is absolutely excluded. I'm thinking of Parlor City, which is based on probably the most ironic type of statement about a very particular political cultural group. Other cities are dealing with chunks with urban fabrics which have been assembled and collected over time. I'm thinking in particular of Bolshoi City, where it's very clear that we have an overlay of moment in time. The same for Omphalia. So there are very different types of rules in the selection of the elements and in their assembly. But altogether, one, and this was a given, one leading, based again on Calvino, remotely based on Calvino, one main idea carried forward by title, which of course reduced the complexity of what urban society is in general.
My other question, if I may, some of you chose, I mean, we can recognize a specific coordinate in the globe, but other cities seems to be floating. You don't really know where they are. I mean, can you speak a little bit about that? In the globe, I mean, you see a collection of fragments, you know where they come from, but the city itself, the background, some of you chose to situate your background, like the Pampas. I think, well, the Bolshoi city also is, we have this reference, but other cities, they seem to be, floating on the map. I just wonder if those who chose not to have a background, why, and
Who wants to address that?
I'm just thinking which islands are, or which parts, which collages are these cities that don't really have a context, right? Is the City of the Dead, Jacqueline? Is that one of them?
Nova Insoltera.
Yeah, I guess For me, it was an ideal city of the dead. So there's something that there hasn't been kind of a city that I think culturally around the world, people view death very differently and death rituals are very different, but there hasn't been many that have combined these different views of death and rituals. So it was kind of this idea of the idyllic death city, kind of in reference to Dante's Inferno as well, with these different layers of how one can view death. So for my particular one, it was just this idyllic scenario that hasn't really been located within the world yet.
But then does the environmental condition play? Are we supposed to imagine that each of those fragments has a certain environmental condition? Because when you have a background, because I also understood that the island nation, I don't know where it is, maybe I missed something, but I'm just thinking of a city is not only a type and an architectural type and a morphology and inhabitants, but also kinds of environmental conditions. And when you describe those thresholds, when you move from one and then you have milk there, etc., are we supposed to imagine that, each of those fragments have an environmental condition for the cities where, the ideal city like yours, or I don't know if the island city has a background. I didn't get it. But my question is about this, the environmental condition. And when you see a background, you understand, well, this is, the light. I mean, I'm Brazilian, and I'm living in the Netherlands now. So it's a totally different light experience and weather conditions. So I was just wondering if this plays in this collage, in this intertextuality or not.
For me, it played a part in terms of the typology of the city. So for example, Stockholm and Japan both have really dense forests. So that's where they connected. And then San Michele is an island already within itself. So I just put and then the city in India is a coastal city, so it blended the forest to the island. So in terms of, I don't know, I think that answers your question, but there was a more environmental layer to it in terms of environmental temperature. Obviously, Stockholm and Japan and Venice are very different climatically, but I'm sure other people also have thought of that.
I think perhaps not only just about the physical environment that our city is based on, but there is also a possibility of this historical effects. So we learned about the Great Fire in London in 1666, and then there were all these new proposals and different kinds of experiments they were trying to do there. But in the end, they built the London how it looked like exactly before. But so I think a lot of us is trying to say, okay, we got this city context, and what if we're adding different kinds of fabrics, different kinds of fragment onto it, and what we look like, and what's going on in a city like this.
Yes, and I think many of us that have this type of city that don't have a specific location, like Parlor Park and Nova Insoltera, and City of Rumors as well. For Parlor Park, the basis was Chicago. Nova Insoltera was theoretically could be set in the South China Sea. City of Rumors basis was LA, but I think we intentionally kept it a little bit uncertain about where it is set in theory, so that it could exist in any of these locations. But the context that we started from was, I believe, for many of them, initially founded or set in a specific location, and it's just the kind of global situation currently. But over time, it could really occur anywhere.
I'd be curious from maybe some of the people who haven't spoken yet to hear any reflections on this kind of idea of total design, and let's say the kind of obsession with one scale. How was that productive, and perhaps also how was it unproductive in your kind of exercise? And did you, for example, consider also looking at other scales to a kind of more scalar approach of the city, or Do you have any reflections on that?
First, a question, Ludo. What do you mean by total design?
Well, obviously, a kind of collage city idea of a kind of focus on a particular skill that you outline. This well, that's perhaps also given to you. So maybe it's the assignment that is given to you, but reflections on that while kind of executing that exercise.
May I say something? Yes, I think the unified scale was one way, which is not probably not always rigidly followed. It was one way of dealing with the question of assembly, of adjacency, and of course one paradigm is collage city. The other one is the exquisite corpse of the Surrealists, i.e. the assembly of unexpected fragments through a sort of line of points. So I think it was probably the only way of being able to imagine some sort of a continuity in this simulation of a simplified urban space.
Also, not everyone followed the same scale.
There are always rebels, you mean? No, but maybe
the question is if you have any kind of reflections on this, because you know what the funny thing is to me is that these kind of surrealists, of course, they were kind of cutting and pasting with paper, right? So then that's one scale. Well, basically all of you were doing this in Photoshop, in which you have kind of the zoom in and zoom out function, in which you basically are working through scales. So in that sense, the kind of methodology is not totally comparable because of the kind of the disappearance of scales in the production, right? So I'd be curious to hear reflections on that.
I don't know if I'm completely, if I may, completely agree with that. That it's of course you take screenshots, right? So in a way that taking of a screenshot and fixating it to that resolution temporarily is you could say that's equivalent to making a cutting from a newspaper. So that is a source material. And then, of course, you're right, in Photoshop, you can infinitely zoom in, out, mask, remask, copy, paste, flip, transform. I can go on for hours, but I'm not going to. I don't know that in terms of the process. Nishi, sorry, I interrupted you. Is there something you'd like to say?
Yes, I was just, when we started the collection of fragments in a way, maybe some of us started with just cities as a whole, but some of us also had these archetypical buildings in mind who had, which had a different scale. So then this whole, how do we make a city where those architectural objects are visible, and then the hierarchy or the scaling or this, maybe it's an exaggerated scale, but that is how we started to make it more visible, to make it an important part of the story. So it was this whole play in terms of scales as well for almost all of us, yes.
I think to continue on that, I think this exercise was also very, what I liked very much about is that making these fictional places, not necessarily contextualized in a geographic position, and writing it in tandem, this let's say this narration of what someone would experience. As was mentioned, we were given these texts by Italo Calvino as an inspiration source or a reference. Yeah, to me, it's really was a nice exercise in world building or imagining what life would be like on the streets or in between these buildings. Which to me was a quite new and refreshing experience to really try to imagine a new place. And I'm wondering also maybe that this is it could expand beyond architecture in the sense that I don't know, for fictional works, theater, music, or I don't know, for on stage. So not necessarily for the building side, but for other types of cultural production, that this type of world building exercise could be very useful.
I mean, maybe to interject in that, every design act is essentially, every projection I would think is inherently optimistic, or every speculation. So should always be an inherent positivity to this. I mean, and that's sort of what Michael's optimism alludes to about imagining life on the street. And I just wonder, the kind of potential cynicism or the literal cynicism in some of these imaginary cities. I find it disturbing in the fact that this should actually be a moment of positivity to you. I mean, these, I forget what word you just used now, fictional cities, Michael, but these are imaginary cities. So that word is also very particularly chosen by Jean-Louis. So, it should be imagining, projecting another way of living that is outside of this particular moment. So, I mean, I think it's just very much important to keep that in mind, or else, one just maintains in a kind of tautological loop of negativity, and you are, let's say, locked in within yourselves. And I mean, the act of making something or projecting something is also a way to wrestle with a set of questions and a set of ideas and a set of urgencies in the form of a kind of intellectual production. I mean, I feel the need to interject that in there. Philip, Sana, did you have some thoughts, Philip?
Yeah, yeah, I'm not really. I mean, I think maybe beyond the goal of the exercise. I mean, I think there is a sort of capacity to sort of suspend your disbelief. So I'm at this point incapable of really reflecting on them, because I'm, you sort of step inside of them and then it becomes something else. So I don't want to judge about if they're dystopian, utopian, or, I think it's the capacity to combine these things. Of course, it always resonates with what each of one is thinking as to the step where they're kind of recombined in a kind of region. I imagine that in itself, in itself is probably the most difficult exercise, because it sort of doubles it's like a collaging to the second order, right? Because it's a collage of collages. And there, I think there is a lot of sort of skill and control in it, but I'm not sure if it adds, again, an extra dimension, because it, in a sense, sort of annihilates it annihilates the question of, for example, Vanessa, right? As to where do things belong, how are they accommodated in the climate, all these kind of things that always are so sort of framing, a reality and the identity and the importance, and, that you sort of, the collaging them in their own world is sort of I would say another important step. And for me, that moment doesn't add necessarily another kind of layer. It's like, what does that region of these different cities together produce, either dystopianly or utopianly, or as this kind of landscape of cities around a kind of random estuary, which is slightly reminiscent of the Solent with the Isle of Wight, which strangely is urbanized in the, I think that's also a level of analogy that is much less explicit in your explanation.
Yes, I must say that the final collage was not preconceived. It came as a last-minute feature. And of course, it reveals many issues about the. In a way, it compresses problems which are represented in a difficult to talk about realism, but in a simplest and probably more acceptable way elsewhere. We see, for instance, this Buenos Aires, which is a city built out of the pampa, squeezed between two pieces of infrastructure. We see Moscow, which becomes, which is has always been a centered, a concentric a system, which is becoming a periphery. So there are a series of bizarre meanings attributed to each one of these compositions. At the same time, the idea here is also based on the presence of water in many of the projects, but water which is strangely never completely discussed as part of the space of the narration, maybe only in Samudera, where every piece of water seems to have a particular function, but elsewhere water is just part of the background and not really a protagonist.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe they're the kind of, maybe there it could have been a sort of a collage, or let's say, to first produce, in a sense, a kind of collaged landscape. Maybe it's a question of, maybe it's similar to the issue Ludo raised about sort of scales, right? That that kind of estuary landscape is one thing, and that the different cities sort of park themselves into it without maybe literally becoming somehow neighborhoods, you know, of a megalopolis, you know, that they kind of constitute a region together, rather than sort of milking this sort of being juxtaposed literally and the one flowing into the other, so that everything can develop, every logic develops its own periphery. I don't know what would be a similar, I mean, I don't know what would be a kind of image.
Yes, here, one of the sources for this assembly, at least one I've pointed to, is the is Frank Lloyd Wright's model for Baedeker City. You know, his model, which is basically, I don't know, 12 foot by 12 foot. And it's not, which is not a model of a territory as it was meant to be urbanized or deurbanized, but more a compression of a series of features which were meant to be spread over an ample territory on a very much smaller footprint. So it's pretty much the same here. We see a sort of compression of entities which need to be fully explained. They're hinterland. There is no hinterland here. There is only what I would call foreland or frontage, and no hinterland. And this is where the point which was also made by Vanessa in some way. We have dissolved the hinterland by gluing the cities together.
Can I just add one commentary to that? I mean, the genre, we evoked it before, but they all seem to be commentaries of contemporary conditions, but pushed to the limit. And as I think, you know, when you see this collection, to me, they're pretty apocalyptic. I mean, Jean-Louis said in the beginning, there was but there's never, for example, if you think the city of waters and if you think that Venice is being threatened by disappearing, so you put all cities that are somehow facing the same challenge together, you seem to be reinforcing a certain negative. So the projects, they always reinforce, you know, this kind of, as a kind of a negative, pushing to the limit, you know, the conditions that are in fact part of our contemporary society. So I wonder if you could just reflect on that. Am I reading it correctly? Because you, for example, just to think that you could put, I don't know, a big chunk, a milestone of infrastructure together with Venice to try to solve, you know, on a planetary scale. I mean, there's never been this idea of trying to, you know, be projective and, you know, instead of, all the fragments put together, they really push to the limit a negative aspect of today's urban life. So, or environmental life. So
sure, there is a sort of gloomy mood to all of that, but if you think of the case of Venice, don't forget first of all the bridge, the road and rail bridge, the harbor, the presence of heavy infrastructure. So there is a lot of infrastructure here, and also for today's Venice, the big dam, the Moise Dam, which has been built in the Laguna. So we're still dealing with this scale of interventions.
Yeah, it was more a commentary that you put together all cities that deal with water. Somehow, I wonder what is the commentary, you know, regarding climate change, for example.
Is there any?
Is there any?
Well, in Mobilopolis, I suggested a scenario where, let's say, machines are the only autonomous machines are a new, let's say, life form that takes over the city and keeps on existing without us, without the need of human beings. Of course, very gloomy for sure. Indeed, I agree, and indeed it takes into account a scenario where climate change has taken up a part of Holland, right? South Holland, North Holland. The regions where Amsterdam to Rotterdam are a part of. So, yeah, if you read between the lines, indeed, I'm looking into the scenario where this indeed occurs. I can't speak for the other students who worked with cities like Venice, for example, how they treated this. Did you guys consider this?
Just a commentary on that. When I heard you speaking, I really thought of that book, The World Without Us, when you spoke, and I'm not sure if it was a reference for you, but
actually I don't know that book, so that's an I might take that up on as a holiday reading.
It describes what's going to happen to the earth when we are not here, with the kind of existing infrastructure, the houses as they are, the bridges, the forests, etc. But it's not really a mystic speculation. It's based on the insights of let's say experts on each of those, you know, how they would project. And when you were speaking, I mean, yours specifically, when you said long after humans have left, I was curious if this was a reference for you.
Not particularly, no, but indeed these ideas are I find fascinating about what things that we find very futuristic or very current. Like, I don't know, for example, in this story, wind turbines, which you are building, yeah, they are the ruins of the day after tomorrow, let's say, instead of tomorrow. So, yeah, interesting stuff.
But I would say, I mean, I'm not sure. Of course, we in architecture culture, there is some kind of a sort of almost implicit training in distinguishing dystopias, utopias, and kind of using material to project, right? But I would say, I mean, our threshold for apocalypse and dystopia, especially these days, is a bit shaken, because we all know that now apocalypse is extremely unspectacular. It's basically staying at home in the, you know, surrounded by despair, neighbors beating each other up, not being able to go to your family. It's not really explosive, and mushroom clouds on the horizon. So it doesn't even have this sort of, you know, dimension to it. So it's very much sort of implanted in a kind of everyday scale. So I think the kind of capacity of seeing the kind of let's say a kind of a larger scale, global kind of understanding of these, how, I mean, it's still the question as to an experiment on the urban, or the collection of experiments of urban forms, you could say, representing something and having similarities across the world, yes or no. I think is something that, well, it's a question of how you explain it. It's I think it's in Mumford's what is it, City in History, I think. There is this, it sort of starts with this distinction between the kind of Nile Valley paradigm versus the Babylonian one, where the Babylonian one is sort of the city is invented as a kind of device for control. It basically sort of condenses the control of the territory in this vantage point of power, where the offices or the hydraulic engineers are located, whatever, so they control. So the city is there because somebody taught like how to control the territory. While the his other side of the spectrum, the Nile Valley, is this sort of idea of a kind of paradise, sort of that is produced by the natural condition and then somehow tamed. And so the city isn't really there because what is controlled is a kind of walled garden, sort of as two kind of extremes, which are immediately very sort of grounded, I would say, very situated in a kind of condition. But already in the origin story, there is an implicit spectrum of utopia and dystopia, I think. I mean, clearly Mumford prefers the Nile Valley, right? Clearly he uses it to have his little propaganda for regional embeddedness, etc. So I think these kind of things, yeah, I mean, I think they have still a certain type of validity because you can park all kinds of subthematics in it. Yeah, so I mean, I don't know, sometimes, you know, it's like I sometimes I think you could encounter something that is maybe intended as a dystopian, but it turns out to be something else, and the other way around, right? So I'm not so sure anymore about these clear categories. And another thing, I think, so Vanessa was saying about the what was it, the world after us, or
the world without us.
Without us, yeah. So another one like this. I don't know if Ludo remembers, maybe at some point when we were doing the hinterland seminars long time ago, this book that came up about After London, which was this sort of 19th, I think late 19th century kind of novel.
No, but in William Morris's News of Nowhere.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Which they're sort of invented apocalypses, which sort of are the preliminary to be able to project, right? It's like as if we need to imagine a disaster to legitimize ourselves to overcome, no? If not, kind of our apocryphal histories wouldn't fit in reality, and they become just pure sort of science fiction, let's say. So yeah, After London was this kind of, you know, literally, it seems like it later became a kind of I think cult book for the ecologists, no, because they imagined like when the nature takes over again, no, nature eats the metropolis, this kind of dreams, which sounds, strangely enough, I would think is extremely dystopian. But then there is other people who think this is just wonderful, you know, they take down the highways, it becomes a park. I mean, like, my God, what a nightmare. But all this kind of vegetative encroachment, you know, no, they think, you know, it's part of, for them, it's a utopia. Anyways, but I think it's great to do. I would like to do this seminar all day, the rest of my life. I think it's the most wonderful thing to do. No.
Okay.
Sana, did you have any final thought or remark?
No, yeah, I was just I still have a question. I think I was wondering to what extent are the placing fragments of existing cities in another context, or the transferring them also, to what extent you adapted them. So if there was yeah, I guess both in image but also in text. So what, by positioning it somewhere else, what was the process of adaptation?
Or what changed when you did that, right?
Anyone can address this?
Well, I'm going to call on Anna, because Anna, you're in my window. So I'm just going to call on you. Anna, do you have a reflection, Anna, since you began? It's the alpha, the alpha, the omega.
Yes, of course. In the case of Buenos Aires, which is a a new opportunity for Buenos Aires to restart again. And it's considering how the city is going to recover the river and the city again. It was trying to replace existing projects related to the history of Buenos Aires, that their aim was, of course, related to how these architectural fragments can reappropriate the idea of sharing the river again. So in the case of Costanera Avenue, the existing project from Forestier, it was the fragment which connected the city with La Pampa, divided by the river and so on. So yes, in the case of many of the projects, I think there was this thought behind about how to give a positive approach to things that are not working nowadays in these existing cities, or how to convert the new contribution. Yeah.
And in terms of the collective collage and the transition between the individuals and towards the collective, in most of the cities, only the most important parts were kept. Some backgrounds were cut in order for them to be able to be next to each other, and scale was also sometimes adjusted.
And also boundaries, right? What do you include and what do you exclude? Sometimes, I mean, we're used to publications about designers and their work, like a very nicely delimited in a way, but working with this material in particular, time is also a factor, and not everything is executed perfectly as was theoretically intended, I guess. So there's some different things to consider when cutting out. And ultimately, we're also making a collage, right? So it needs to look pretty in a way as well.
Sure, and it often does. No, I think the question of the Sana is interesting. How do you select a fragment? How you limit it? How do you excise what is supposedly context and what is, in the case, I don't know, in the case of Moscow, when you take a piece of Petersburg, where you stop, what you consider as the meaningful unit. Of course, you have the strategies a la Piranesi, a la Campo Marzio, where you reduce, you have build complex, which have their own limits, but here it's more elusive. Good. So.
Great. Well, thank you again, Jean-Louis, for your time here with us.
It was a learning experience also for me.
Until we meet again in person with a nice little beautiful book. So thank you to the students. Thank you to Vanessa, Philip, for engaging with us, Sana, Ludo. So great to have everybody. So see you soon. Well, see you in 1 hour, since we continue with another set of presentations in the continuous loop. So great job, guys. So talk to you soon.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.